All right, well, let's go ahead and begin. I'm sure people will be joining as we get started here. Welcome, everybody. This is our first of a three-part series, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute on community solar. And this one is dedicated to consumer basics. So we're just going to start from scratch, explain to folks what community solar is. There's a lot of different definitions out there, and we'll get into a little bit more of that in episode 2. But we just want to give folks a sort of a level set of how this works, and in places where it's available, we also want to make sure that you're aware that that is. And in a few states, we don't have coverage everywhere in the country yet, but in a few states, you can also use our platform, which I'll give you a quick demo of at the end of the webinar, about how to see what subscriptions are available to you where you are, if you're in particular, if you're in DC, Minnesota, or Maryland. So with that, let's kick it off. Couple of housekeeping notes here. Everybody speaks Zoom now these days for the most part, but just for folks, if you want to control your audio at certain points, at the end, if we have time, we'll leave some space for questions and we can unmute folks if you want to ask. But if you'd like to ask them during the presentation, feel free to use the chat box to do that. Hannah's graciously agreed to moderate those questions for us. She may answer some directly, and she may send those to me as well. I'll pause periodically. So feel free to ask at any point during the presentation. Let's keep this interactive. You can also raise your hand using that feature. And then we do want to make sure people know this webinar is being recorded. So we are going to post this later. After the session is over, we'll send it out to people so they can take a look. And for anybody who couldn't come, if you know somebody else who wanted to be here and couldn't, we'll be sending a link out to them as well. So as I mentioned, this is the first in a three-part series. You'll see the next two episodes. This is every Wednesday at 7 p.m. starting this Wednesday for the next 3 weeks. The next one next week, we're going to be covering program types and get into a little bit more of sort of definitions of what community solar is. There's a lot of different versions out there, and making sure you have a good understanding of sort of the variations, where it's available, and what and how those differences sort of why they matter for you. And then on the last one, something a little special, something close to my heart, which is helping communities understand a little bit more about project development. And if they want to take an active role in putting a project together for community solar, some basic topics and vocabulary about what that looks like, and how they can do that, where it's permitted by law and where they're able to. A little bit of background about Solar United Neighbors. So we're a nonprofit. We have been around for about 10 years. And what we're doing and what we have been doing for all that time is really helping people go solar, primarily directly up until recently through rooftop solar, helping them connect to the renewable energy economy, produce their own electricity, and then help people organize ultimately to improve policies at the local level and the state level around renewables in particular. So we're a network of people who are producing their own electricity. Community solar fits into that because it is a way for us to expand access to renewables for folks that can't go solar directly on their own property for whatever reason or where they live. And we'll talk more about that very shortly. So how did we get started? A little bit of origin story here for us. Our executive director, Anya Schoolman, who lives in the Mount Pleasant neighborhood of Washington, D.C., wanted to go solar back in 2007. They ended up forming a group of people to take an entire neighborhood solar, essentially, to make it easier, not only to find some competitive pricing, but also to sort of wade through the terminology and some of the issues that they encountered. And back in 2007, it was pretty hard. They worked together and ended up taking 40 homes in their neighborhood solar. And that's sort of the kernel of what a lot of what we do today, which is still helping people install solar on rooftops. This and what we're talking about here tonight is community solar, so that's not on your roof, and we'll give you some examples of that. But it's a way for people who can't access solar directly to still get those same benefits through what we call shared solar or community solar. Fast forward to today, we're in all of those states you see in orange there, including that big orange state of Texas, where Hannah is our program director. And in those states, we have staff on the ground working on helping people go solar in a variety of different ways, although we are a national organization, so we can help people anywhere in the United States through our membership program, go solar and get support. And that is something that we're really proud of, and we're going to be expanding those services. And hopefully you'll see us even in more states moving forward as we grow. So let's get to the main topic here tonight. So first of all, I want to talk a little bit about what makes a good roof for solar. When you look at a solar home, some of you may be solar owners. I am. I've had solar on my roof since 2012. what it takes to have solar on your roof, in addition to a bunch of other things, is solar access, right? You want to have solar that is sun that is shining on the property, on the roof, for a certain amount of time during the day. And you want to make sure that the location where those panels are not going to be too shaded, and that they're going to be able to receive that sunlight, convert it into electricity that your house can use, and power those loads, right? Ideally, that's going to happen for homes that are facing anywhere from south to east and west. And that's not everybody, right? You might have a tree, you might have a bad roof, meaning, in other words, there's not enough space, or it may be too old and needs to be replaced, but you're not ready to do that yet, or you may be a renter. We're gonna go into that a little bit more. But the point of this is really to say that solar is not gonna work on every home all across the country as much as we would like it to. A lot of different reasons for that. You'll see, as I mentioned earlier, you might be in a single family home that maybe doesn't have a good location for solar. You might not be the home's owner. You might be a renter. The roof might be in bad condition. Or it might be on this example on the left here, where you're in an apartment building, a multi-family building, where there's not enough space on the roof, or the roof might be occupied with a lot of things like HVAC equipment and other things that are not going to be able to enable a solar installation up there. Or there's just simply not enough space to make up enough electricity for the entire building to use. So these are some of the reasons why somebody might not be able to directly invest in solar energy production for themselves. So what's the alternative? If you have an electricity meter and you are not someplace where you can put solar on your roof directly, or you are not able to invest in it for a variety of reasons, and there's other reasons as well, like you may not be able to finance solar for whatever, you might not have access to credit, for especially for low and moderate income individuals that may not be able to install solar directly, even if they had a roof that was good for solar. We need to find some other alternatives, right? And what that looks like is community solar. And I want to be clear, when we talk about community solar, we talk about sharing solar. And I've mentioned this earlier, but just to really drive it home, because it can be confusing for people. We're not talking about solar that's going on a single home or business. That's great. We love that. We help people go solar on their roofs all the time. That's a lot of what we do, but that's not this. It's also not green power. If anybody lives in a place where the electricity market is deregulated, in other words, if you have a retail electricity supplier, it's not your main utility, but you get offers in the mail for electricity from a third party, that's called retail supply. And some of those retail supply offers offer green options. It might be 100% wind, or 50% wind and 50% solar, or hydropower. Those credits, or that electricity, is actually coming to you in the form, in most cases, in the form of a credit, a renewable energy credit. It might be really far away where that electricity is being generated, and you're getting sort of a paper credit to represent that, or the company that's providing that electricity is. That's also not community solar. It's a fine way for us to encourage renewable production on the electricity grid, but it is not the local sharing version of solar that we're talking about here tonight. So just want to make sure folks are clear on that before we get too much further. And again, nothing wrong with either one of these options. It's just not the thing that we're here for. So what are we here for? I love this picture, partially because I live in Washington, but also because I think it does a really good job of just sort of visualizing it for people. What we're talking about is we're talking about taking an array somewhere else in your area that's going to be owned and operated by a third party. You might be invested in it, but most cases it's going to be a business that owns that array, or even the utility company in some cases. And they're going to be offering a percentage of that solar array for you to participate in. How that gets offered varies on the project, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later. But the general idea is still the same, which is that there's a much larger array somewhere. It could be on a roof, it could be in a field, it could be on a carport, and you're taking a portion of that electricity output, and you're getting a credit for that on your bill. So you're really just taking a portion of it, and you're becoming a customer of that array to be able to get those credits that offset your electricity bill. A little bit more about this. So when we talk about community solar, we use a bunch of different terms. You'll hear different terms as well. Community solar, community shared solar, solar gardens. These are all similar concepts of having an array elsewhere that is being subscribed to by a large number of people who are then getting credits applied to their electricity bill for some of that output. So it's somewhere else, almost always somewhere else than on your own property. And it's also proportional, as I mentioned, right? You're not getting everything or nothing, you're getting a piece of it. How that energy gets credited to your electricity bill is done virtually. So in most cases, what we're really talking about here is a billing mechanism by the utility company to take the electricity that comes from that solar array, make note that you had part of it coming to your bill, and then they're making notations on your electricity bill to apply those credits, which ultimately lowers your electricity bill or offsets it based on the percentage that you have subscribed to for that array. And we'll have some examples a little bit later. Oops, looks like we got a question here. Hannah is asking, if we were in a good location, but our roof is tall, is it still possible? So if you're, I think, Hannah, if I'm understanding your question correctly, you're in a building that maybe is several stories tall. If that's the case, that's still certainly possible for solar. There's some different engineering challenges there, depending on how big the building is. But if you have a good roof, regardless of the building height, there should be some engineering solution for it. So we definitely recommend talking to an installer or a provider in your area. And you're also welcome to reach out to us if you'd like with questions. Pardon me just for a second. I'm going to take one of these because my voice is getting a little scratchy. All right, so we talked a little bit about what community solar is. Let's talk a little bit more about why. We, as I mentioned, we've been helping people for close to a decade, helping people go solar, but not everybody can. From our perspective, what we're ultimately trying to do is to get as many people connected to the renewable energy economy as possible, because we want people to get those benefits, and we want them ultimately to be willing to advocate for improving access to solar for everyone in society to be able to get access to it. So if not everybody can go solar directly on their roof, community solar is a way for us to expand the number of people who have direct connection and direct benefit to solar. How that happens varies quite a bit based on location and state, and we're going to cover that more in episode 2. But there's some key sort of principles that we're talking about here. One, if it works as well as it should be cheaper electricity for you. That's not always going to be the case. It depends on some of the programs and some of the economics, but ideally, community solar should save you money on your bill. The combination of what you pay for community solar and what you pay your utility company should be less than what you were paying before. Second, which I just alluded to, is fair access to solar for everyone. If we have residents, community members that are not able to access solar directly because they're a renter, they're in a multifamily building, what have you, this is a way for us to make that access available. And as I also mentioned, is wider participation in clean energy. We want people to participate in solar. We want them to get those benefits because ultimately that's going to create the force for change for us to expand solar even more. And it's also a good benefit for people who are participating. And this last one, community-based power. These projects are essentially inherently local, right? They're somewhere close to you. They're in your utility area in most cases. And what that means is that it is energy that's being produced for and in your community. Who owns and operates the arrays is going to vary, but the community solar programs at their best enable a wide array of organizations, people, and individuals to be able to own and operate an array. And we've seen one person operate a small array and share it with people. We've seen a group of 20 people, 30 people put together their money together and operate an array and share it with each other. We've seen a large company compete for business with other companies owning and operating arrays. All these things are possible with a good community solar program. And again, we'll talk about that more in episode 2. But this is a real way for us to take the ability to invest in clean energy, keep it in the local economy, and make sure that as much of that benefit stays in the local economy as well. Wouldn't be a presentation about things like this without a fancy graphic. This hopefully brings it together a little bit for you in terms of the mechanics. You've got a group of people who are subscribing. They are paying somebody else to purchase that electricity or subscribe to that electricity. That's going to be in some form of a contract. In most cases, they're going to be subscribing to a percentage of the output from that array. And I have a slide a little later talking about the different types of offerings you might see, but some number of people are going to take the electricity output from that array and get those virtual credits. The array itself is operated, that facility is going to be operated by whoever the project owner is, And they're going to take that electricity, it's going to be connected directly to the utility grid, and it's going to send it into that grid and power whatever is nearby. Physics is physics. Those electrons are going to go wherever that array is and power something close by. But when you're sending that electricity out to the grid, the electricity company is metering what's getting sent out. So that's where they come in. They're recording how much electricity is being produced. The organization that owns the array is recording how many people are involved and what percentage of that electricity each one of them get. And they're working with the utility to make sure in this last part of the loop that those people get credited on their bill for that electricity production. So that's how you get that loop, that circle, and that at its simplest form is community solar. You pay for the electricity, the project provider produces it through the array, the utility company works with them to make sure that you get your credit. Looks like we've got another question here. Let's pause for a couple of questions. And anything stand out to you for any of these questions?
Yeah, let's see. There's a question about in the case of a power outage, is community solar more reliable? And since it doesn't travel through many miles of cable, is less cost to electrical resistance? Maybe you could cover community solar in grid outages.
Okay. So community solar is in grid outages is going to be similar to any other part of the electrical grid. Like if that part of the grid is out, the arrays are probably going to shut down as well. So the provider, the operator of that facility, they're monitoring that facility, and their goal is to keep it up and running as often as much as possible, because producing electrons is what they're going to get paid for, right? So they're incentivized tremendously to make sure that array is operating, and they're being run as a business in most cases, making sure that happens. Where it's connected to the grid and whether it's suspect to outages is more a reflection of where it's connected and less about the facility itself. But again, that's the operators are incentivized to make sure those arrays stay functional.
And then another question, can you have community solar for members of a Sunday school if they're all living in the same state but in different counties? So they have different energy suppliers.
So that's a great question. It's going to depend on the program, but most of the time your subscribers need to be in the same place as the array, the same utility area. That's not always the case. Some programs differ. Sometimes it's adjacent counties. So wherever you are, that's someplace that we would just want to make sure that what that program supports. It also may mean that you're subscribed to different arrays. So if you have people spread amongst multiple counties, people in one county may be subscribed to one array, you might be subscribed to another one. So it depends on what the offerings are that are available.
And then any compelling reasons to opt for community solar if you have a good roof for solar? I would imagine it's mostly customer preference, but that was another question.
So yeah, that's a great question. It's going to vary on the market. I see this as Keith asking this question. If you're living in DC, for this particular person, you're going to be best off in terms of economics for owning and operating your own array. That's what's going to maximize your economic output. But not everybody wants to do that. Not everybody has the ability to do that. Community solar is a good alternative. I will say you can also have them work together, right? So if you're not able to offset all of your electricity and you do have a good roof for solar and you have access to community solar can cover the rest of that production in some cases. That's what I'm doing with mine. My array only covers about 50%. The other roughly 50% comes from a community solar subscription, or will. I'm actually waiting right now to get that signed up. Another example thing I just want to make sure, which I mentioned here briefly in answering one of those questions, is that in most cases, some programs are going to vary, but in most cases, people who have their own utility bill, who pay their own electricity bill, those are the ones that are going to be able to subscribe to community solar. If you're in a multifamily building that has a master meter or a single meter, it might still be possible, but it would have to be through the building that happened. So if anybody's in that situation, feel free to contact us. We're happy to provide whatever support we can to sort of navigate what your options might be where you are. Any other questions at this point?
One question about credit and billing arrangements, sort of how they're structured if there are multiple users. It's just how are credit and billing arrangements going?
Credit and billing arrangements. I'm not entirely sure I understand the question. If the structure of applying the credits varies by program. So it's a little hard to answer sort of in a broad sense there. If somebody wants to provide a little more clarity, I can go back and answer that question in a little bit. I'm gonna keep going here. We'll keep plowing through. So where is it available? All the red states, and this thanks to our friends at Solstice. This map is sort of getting updated on a regular basis because new states are adding it. But in the red states, these are places where there's legislation that's actually enacted it. The blue ones are where there are projects, one or two projects, maybe by a utility company, but it's not available everywhere through what they call a state mandate or a legislative mandate. We hope other states join this list, but right now, the map sort of determines to some degree how much you're able to access community solar in your area. If you're in a red state, chances are you should be able to participate directly. If you're in a state that's blue on this map, you might need to be in a utility area that actually has a program available. Ways you can participate. Subscribing to solar energy, which is what we've been talking about today. That's what we're going to drive through for the rest of this presentation. Is we're going to go into some things to think about as a consumer. Hosting an array, if you have land and developing a project, those are a little bit more complicated, but can really create some real value for your community. We're going to talk about those in episode 3. So if you're interested in those, take a look at the chat box. Feel free to register tonight. Episode 3 is 2 weeks from today. So let's get into some shopping tips for community solar. A little bit about terminology. I know we've got some folks here who are energy veterans and others who are new, so I just want to make sure we're on the same page. 2 terms you'll see in here: kilowatts, which is refers to the rated capacity of a system to produce energy. So your array that you're subscribing to might be listed in kilowatts or even megawatts, which are a larger scale array. That's the ability for that system to produce energy, but how much it produces depends on where it is and the conditions on the ground. Kilowatt hours, that's the actual energy that you are paying for from your utility company. And ultimately, that's the output from the array that is creating the credits that are going to offset your bill. So kilowatt hours is the primary thing you're going to be thinking about here. I just want to make sure that we draw a distinction between those two, because that can confuse people sometimes. I mentioned this earlier, but just to summarize a little bit on some types of offerings you'll see. This varies by provider. It could vary by program as well. But the most ones that we've seen a lot of is buying a fixed portion. So that, again, going back to that terminology, your provider might say you're buying a 3 kilowatt block of energy production. So that might translate into a certain number of panels, but the kilowatt size subscription is going to be matched to how much energy you produce to try to offset some or all of that. And that's the way that it might be marketed to you. Second is paying for a fixed block of kilowatt hours. This is less common from what we've seen, but could be the same number of kilowatt hours every month that you're buying from the provider. And then the last one is a per month, paying monthly per kilowatt hour, which is seems to be more and more common, and that comes in a couple different forms. One is by a price by kilowatt hour. So let's say in your utility company you're paying 12 cents a kilowatt hour from your utility, and that means the whole price for all of the different charges that are on the bill. The community solar subscription might be 10 cents or 11 cents. And that rate might be flat for the entire length of the contract, or it might go up with what they call an escalator. The other option, which we see more and more, and this one I think is one that is much easier for consumers to kind of wrap their heads around, is a percentage below the utility rate that's offered. So in Maryland, for example, you'll see offerings of 5% below the utility rate. What that means is that when you subscribe to that electricity offering from community solar, your rate that you're paying for the community solar energy is always going to be below that rate that you would have paid the utility company. So it's sort of a guaranteed is kind of a word that most companies don't like to say, but it's essentially it's very likely that it would be below the rate you were paying the utility company into the future because of the way they structure it. Lots of different options there. We'll talk a little bit about sort of sorting that out at the end as well. So let's give you a fictional example. Let's say I live in a multifamily housing building, like the one on the right, and I really want to put solar on my roof, but I've got HVAC equipment up there. The building management company doesn't really want to do it. It's too long to put the panels up, and there's just no way it's going to happen. But I live someplace where I pay my own electricity bill. So I have a meter that I have a bill specifically with my utility company. So I've got an option. I'm going to figure out how much I use per year, and that's going to be on my utility bill. Your provider is going to help you with that, right? So this is not something you have to figure out on your own if you don't want to, but it's a good idea to just have this idea in mind. 12,000 kilowatt hours for folks that are aware. I might be living in the penthouse suite for this apartment building because that is a lot of energy for an apartment, but you never know. 12,000 kilowatt hours, let's say in this example, is what I'm using. How much of that do I want to offset? I might be gung-ho and say I want to offset 100%. That's fantastic. Your provider may or may not have an option to do that. Some of the offerings that you'll see are either have a minimum, a percentage that you have to subscribe of your total energy usage, or a maximum, or both. So that's going to vary by the offering, but it's a good idea for you to have an idea of how much you want to be able to cover. And again, for folks that have rooftop solar, I want to offset it. You might need to find a project that lets you subscribe to less than 80 or 90% if you're making a lot of that electricity yourself. So you're figuring out what subscription, you're shopping around to look for providers and what their options are to be able to get a sense of prices and terms. And once you've found that, you're going to sign up to work with that provider, get those credits that come off of your electricity bill, and ideally be saving money on a monthly basis. One thing I want to point out, which I should have pointed out earlier, is for some of these subscriptions where you're getting a percentage of the output, excuse me, that percentage is going to go up and down. Sorry, the amount of electricity produced is going to go up and down throughout the year because a solar array is not going to produce the same amount of electricity every year, every day, and every month. In the wintertime, it's going to produce less. Spring and summer, it's going to produce more. In the fall, it'll produce pretty well, and then the winter again. So how much you get credited is going to vary by month for some of these offerings, and a lot of them, which means that your savings is also going to vary by month as well. Over the course of the year, it's going to average out to some percentage of your total usage. But it's important to know that those credits are going to vary, excuse me, from month to month. I'm going to pause just for a second here to take a sip. And while I'm doing that, Hannah, can you see if we have any other questions that have come up?
Yeah, so the questions there's two questions that sort of get at the same idea, which is how you organize a community solar project in your area. So one of the questions was about a group of farmers in an area form a community with panels on their farm structures. Can they be shared by everyone in the area or just the members of the community? And then another question in the vein of how to organize a community solar project was how small community groups like a homeowners association could organize their own community solar.
I love those questions. I'm going to give some short answers here. We're going to get into that a lot more in episode 3, which is around project development. Short answer for both of those is for programs that allow for competition and allow wide participation. DC, Maryland, Minnesota, I believe all are in that category. And I'm sure the other programs that have come out as well. New Jersey, I think as well, and probably Illinois. I'm sure I'm forgetting some. When the legal conditions exist to do that, there's no structural issue with community farmers banding together to own and operate a facility or a homeowners association. What you need are the project components, right? You need land, you need some entity to own and operate the array, which is going to be running for 20, 25 years. The devil is really in those details of how that works. So we don't see a lot of those projects yet, but we personally would love to see more of them because it really keeps a lot of the value in the community. And it's mostly a function of being able to assemble a group of people who are willing to go through that process to own and to work through the project development and own and operate the array. I will say that if you're someplace where you're interested in doing that, please contact me. I want to learn about folks who would like to do these things, and we're eager to support those types of projects. So we'll get into a lot more of that in episode 3, and I really appreciate those questions. Any other questions before we move on?
I think you covered the others.
Cool. So let's talk a little bit about shopping. The ones at the top here, these are, I forgot to give you Hannah a link. We have on our website, you'll see at the end of the episode, there's a link to our community solar site. A lot of the questions here we have on a PDF on our site. It's like a 2-page PDF that is available for handout. Not that anybody goes to public meetings anymore, but it's still a really good reference for shopping in terms of what community solar is and a lot of the things to think about when you're shopping for it. Some of these questions may or may not be important for everyone, but we feel like some of them are worth asking. So in other words, who's operating the project? You know, is it in a competitive market? Are you in a utility area where there's only one program operated by your utility company? Or are you in a state that has legislatively mandated community solar and you might have 4 or 5 companies that are vying for your business? Where, you know, what's the conditions for you? Who's operating the project? What company is it? Have they been in business for a while? Do they have experience running community solar arrays? These are you know, questions that are worth asking. There's a lot of good companies out there that are really starting to expand the number of facilities that they're creating all over the country, because each of these markets creates more and more opportunity for those companies to become and grow into competitive solar energy development companies. So lots of opportunity for competition, which we'll again talk about in later episodes. Are there any local benefits? So it's worth asking to your developer, were there local job opportunities created for developing this project? Is there a local partner that might be getting discounted access to electricity? Sometimes that's true, sometimes it isn't. You may not have those options, but it's worth asking those questions. And then the bottom part here, you're getting more into some of the specifics of just the contract, right? How much am I paying? How long is the contract? A lot of them, the contract lengths are getting shorter and shorter, which we think is great. And the terms and fees often are also getting limited to either no fees for cancellation or only in specific circumstances. A lot of times when you have a subscription, even if the term is a couple of years, if you move out of the utility area, usually a lot of times there's no fee. They can transfer that subscription to somebody else. Or if you move within the utility area, you can keep your subscription. So you don't have to stay in the same property to keep your community solar subscription if you're in the same utility area, which is great. It can be very portable. What other fees are there? And this last one, what happens if the system underperforms? This depends a little on the contract that you're in. So if you're paying by kilowatt hour and it's underperforming, it's not really an impact to you because it's not making as much electricity. So you're not paying as much per the kilowatt hours. If your contract is for a fixed amount of capacity, like that 5 kilowatt example, then you might see a different impact because you've paid for capacity to produce energy, you're not paying by the kilowatt hour, by the energy unit. So depends on the offering, but those are questions to consider. I'm not going to go through all of these here, but just as a reminder for any other contracts you're doing, read the fine print. Some contracts are longer than others. They have different terms in them. Look through them and scrutinize what's in the contract and make sure you understand what your options are for canceling, dealing with disputes, all of those things, just like you would for any other contract that you enter into. The requirements for these contracts, I will say, vary by state and by program because they're often based on the regulatory requirements. So one state might have really strict requirements. Another state may have fewer requirements, and that might determine how much rigor there is in a contract. It also varies quite a bit by provider as well. All right, so how are we doing on time here? We've got, perfect, we got 10 minutes. Our goal here, and I just should have said this at the beginning, we're trying to do these in 45 minutes, 45 to 50 minutes. Make sure we keep everything nice and crisp and we leave time for questions afterwards. So I am actually gonna give you all a quick tour of our community solar shopping platform. So bear with me for just a minute. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and pull up a different page for you all. And then reshare my screen again. The wonders of technology. Okay. Hannah, is that turning out okay? Great. So what you're looking at here is our community solar platform. This is something we launched a couple of years ago for us to be able to provide a neutral place for people, it's for people to see what subscriptions are available in their area. We are a small and scrappy nonprofit, so we don't have coverage everywhere, and we've been trying to expand it as much as possible, but we did want to make sure that people see what is available here, especially if you're in some of the states where we have this. What we're trying to do is provide some general education about community solar and then really allow people to drill into a particular state where they might have access. I'm going to use Maryland today just because we've had that state the longest and we have the most number of offerings listed here. How the offerings look and where they are for a lot of these programs, and Maryland is no exception, is based by utility area. There could be exceptions there or examples that are different. In Minnesota, by one example, there are rules about adjacent counties and where you're being able to access a particular project. So it varies by where you are. For here, we're going to go into one of these utility areas. We'll go into BGE. On the platform itself, we're providing people with information, general information about community solar, a lot of which is going to look familiar to you from what you saw here, as well as subscriber agreements. Again, a lot of the things we've touched on here, and this idea of how the billing works. I'm not going to go through those tonight, but I encourage you to come and take a look at it. We're also going to give people a chance to get a general sense of how much electricity savings they're going to see from one of these projects based on an average monthly bill. This is going to vary by project, but this is sort of a general at the utility level view. And then we want people to take a look at what's there in their area. So you can see that there's a number of projects in this utility area, and they all have a little bit of different information about them, right? So each one of these you're going to be able to drill into and see more information about who they are, what the offering is, how much it costs. We try to summarize it here. Something else we feel really strongly about, which we'll get into more detail in episode 2, is whether they're low income accessible. So you'll see a couple of these projects in this area specifically have provisions, and Maryland has in their structure of their program provisions for low and moderate income access. Some other states do as well, but we want to flag that at the project level, which projects actually have that access available. So if we're looking at some of these projects, you can see this, as I mentioned earlier, this idea of below the utility rate, 10% below the utility rate for this example. I will say as I'm going through this platform, we're installer neutral. We're not, project neutral. What we're doing here is really presenting all the projects that we know of. We want to make sure people have a kind of a level set of information to compare to. But when they're looking at these projects, we want to sort of dig into some of the details for people and give people consistent view of what it is, where the project is, who's operating it, and then get into some of these questions that people have. What's the cost? Is it going to be cheaper in the future? What's our take on that? And is your energy going to go up over time? Fees, that type of thing. We're also going to let people get into a little bit more, if they really want to, about some of these other things, like is there a credit score required, which sometimes is true, but not always, and some of these other sort of nitty-gritty details. What to do if you need to file a complaint, who you have to contact, and some information about community impacts. It's a lot of information to process. We're eager to get feedback on this platform, but we're excited to have this resource available for people, and we hope that you take advantage of it. If you don't see your state listed here and you want to know more, feel free to contact us. As I said, we're trying to fill in as much as we can based on our resources, but we feel like this is a pretty good opportunity for people to educate themselves about what's available in their area. And for any of these projects, when you are looking at something that looks good to you, if you fill this out, you're going to be taken to the provider site where you can sign up or talk to somebody a little bit more about the offering and potentially become one of their customers. All right, so let me pull that window open again here. Hannah, any other questions come through as we're doing that?
There's just a question about what if community solar isn't available in your state, which seems like a good thing to advocate on behalf of, but yeah, curious if we have a good response to that question.
If community solar is not available in your state, I would definitely recommend advocating with your local representative. For one, if it's in a state where we operate, that map that I showed you earlier, definitely get in touch with us. I'll say at least one state I can think of, probably two, where we work, Pennsylvania is the one that comes to mind. There's an active bill being considered in the state house to enable community solar, and we're working on that on a regular basis along with a lot of other partners. Those bills become much more likely when individuals who are consumers, who are in a particular district, advocate for them. That's really what pushes these things forward, right? It's constituents contacting people and trying to make that happen. Sometimes it takes a little while, but those voices do matter, and we encourage you to make your voice heard if you'd like to see community solar where you live and you don't have it now. I'm going to switch screens back here while if there's any other questions, and go to one last slide, and then we're going to wrap it up here. So let's look at that. Okay, so what's next? I showed that link that I just went to here for the platform. Above that soulunitedneighbors.org/community-solar, the flyer that I mentioned earlier, if you're interested, there's a whole bunch of resources there. You're going to see our policy, our sort of principles on citing community solar, which can be put in a lot of different places. If you're interested in reading about how we think about that, it's more of a policy question. There's also a policy guide on there, as well as some educational resources and links to other resources from other organizations that you might find useful, depending on whether you're a consumer, energy nerd, policy wonk. Hopefully we've got a lot of materials there. And if you have any questions at all, if you're interested in learning more or working with us directly, feel free to contact us at info@soulunitedneighbors.org. That's what I'd recommend. And you'll eventually end up on my desk probably, and I will be happy to help you. Let's open it up for questions here. I think if anybody wants to ask a question out loud, we're happy to enable you there. Just raise your hand and we'll allow you to talk and you can ask your question. We've got time for a few questions here. We're at 7:45, perfect, yeah. So if you have questions, feel free to stick around and ask them. If you don't, thank you so much for joining tonight, and I'll send out a recording of this webinar probably tonight or early tomorrow morning to folks so they can have it for their viewing pleasure. Thank you very much for coming, everyone. Any questions for us? Looks like, oops, sorry, I've got a little mouse issue here. There we go. Aram, go right ahead and ask your question. Aram, are you there?
Sorry, I was muted. Okay. My question, can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you just fine.
Okay. Yes. Is there a time limit, for this commitment in this? Like if I sell my house and move away, can I just cancel it?
It depends on the project offering itself, but in most cases, if you leave the utility area, you should be able to cancel your subscription without a fee. Most of the offerings we've seen have those rules, but it's going to depend on the provider. So you do want to read your contract.
Okay, that's good, because I was discouraged about putting panels on my house, because there is a problem. If I sell the house and leave, then I might have to be committed, or whoever buys it has to be committed.
So if you're putting it on your house, that's sort of like a separate question, but definitely contact us about that, because owning solar on your house or financing it through a loan often is a value for the home sale, and usually doesn't create any sort of burden at sale. If you have a lease or a PPA, sometimes that can complicate things, but feel free to reach out to us and we're happy to provide some more support there.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Let's see, Aaron, go right ahead and ask your question.
Can you hear me?
I sure can.
Okay. How are you, Corey? Nice to see you.
You too.
So my question about the billing thing was, you know, I have solar on my roof now, and it's about 50% offset. So in the billing, it's this whole question of billing. Is it going to be pretty easy to see? I would be looking to get the other 50% offset. And would it be, how's the billing going? Like, is it easy for a consumer to see how you're doing? And, you know, are the bills easy to interpret this part of it?
That's a great question. So for other listeners, Aaron is in Maryland. So this is going to be specific to the Maryland program, but the way that information is presented on the bill is not as clear right now for the Maryland program as we'd like. There's some regulatory changes that are in process to sort of require it be presented in a certain way. The short answer is on the utility bill, it's probably going to be pretty generalized, but it's going to show you the credits that are applied. I think the more clear answer you'll get is from your provider, is how they show your credits and how they're applied, because they're going to be tracking that as well. So I would, when you're looking for projects, I would just make sure to ask them what kind of reporting they have so that you can get a good sense of that. But whatever's left over, whatever you've netted as your energy usage that doesn't get covered by rooftop solar, the credits that you get from community solar are going to offset that portion of your bill.
Right. And that's what I'm trying to, that's going to, what's going to be interesting to calibrate, you know, since the array itself, what it offsets changes, you know, and it's changing as the weather patterns change, you know, so as climate changes.
Yeah. So one thing you have going for you in Maryland is that because this community solar program is under the net metering regulations, the way the overage credits work is very similar to rooftop. So if you have community solar credits in 1 month, in other words, you had too many credits and you had leftover, you'll actually roll those over to the next month. So as long as you use them up by April, you should be fine.
That's great.
Similar to rooftop. And
any update on when we expect to hear about the net metering challenge?
From NERA.
Yeah.
So for folks that are not familiar with that, there's a challenge in front of FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, about net metering broadly. I do not have any updates on that. Our hope is that we don't hear anything and that FERC just ignores it. So it's a little bit hard to tell when it'll be safe. But we're very hopeful that FERC will just ignore that petition.
And last question, when's the regulatory change for Maryland likely to happen on the billing?
The intent was to put some of those changes together by the end of the summer, but it's not gone very fast. So I would not expect to see those probably until next year, based on the speed that that's happening right now.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. All right, so let's see, who else has raised their hand? Shan Gordon. Yeah, Shan, you're unmuted. Go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, so I just came in like a couple of minutes late. So is there a cost for signing up?
For community solar, through Solar United Neighbors, there's definitely no cost. For community solar, what we're doing, what the webinar really is just making sure people understand how it works and how to access it. The cost would be whatever your agreement is with your provider. Usually it's going to be by kilowatt hour. So.
Okay. Now, and the sites that you have listed on your, that's kept updated so that if they run out of subscriptions, that'll be reflected in what I see.
We hope so. It's sometimes a challenge to stay up to speed with that in terms of getting that information from the providers. So you may contact them and find out that subscription is full. All the providers that are listed, to my knowledge, are actively developing more projects. I'm speaking specifically about Maryland, but in most cases, they're working on a pipeline. So they usually have a wait list that you can join and get access when a subscription becomes available.
Okay. Now, I've seen some programs that they have kind of a two billing system where they'll get the credit on their BG bill and then they'll have to pay the solar provider later. A discounted rate, right?
Yeah.
But I've also seen some that just have a one bill system.
Yeah, there is one provider that does that. And that's the sort of special sauce that they have in sort of managing the billing. But yeah, that's also possible.
Okay. It's just a little more confusing to explain that two bill system.
Yeah, and so I'm glad you brought that question up. So I should have made that probably clear earlier. Is that when you're subscribing to community solar, in most cases it depends on the provider and the location, but in most cases you're getting two bills, right? You're paying for the community solar subscription usually to a third-party provider, and you're paying the utility company, and you're paying the utility company less because you're getting those credits. But the combination of those bills should be less than what you paid before, but you are still paying two bills. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. John McNamara, go ahead and ask your question. Hey, John, thanks for joining us.
Oop, there, I'm unmuted. Okay. Yeah, thanks, Corey. Great presentation. Corey knows I'm a long-time supporter of Solar United Neighbors. They put the roof. They guided me through a rooftop solar on my house. And so my question is, are you going to use that same magic that Solar United Neighbors does with rooftop owners? That is, you band them together in a co-op, and then you can negotiate with providers to get a better deal than they would negotiating on their own. Are you going to?
I love that question. We have wanted to do that. We actually experimented with that about a year and a half ago. And from what we could tell, because of the margins and sort of the costs involved, it didn't look like the community we were working with was actually going to get really much of any discount by creating enough volume. So it didn't seem like it was worth the trouble to organize people, except in the context of maybe something like this where we're encouraging people and educating them, but it didn't seem like it would drive a lot of price savings. That may change in the future, so we're always open to that, but at this point, it didn't seem like there was a lot of there for that kind of model.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm. Looks like we also have a question from Patty McGrath. Go ahead, Patty.
Hi, I subscribe to a community solar project, the Panorama Project in Maryland. I'm a Pepco.
Okay.
But before I subscribed, I was a Clean Choice Energy customer for wind.
Okay.
I didn't have to give up Clean Choice wind energy. I could keep it as my backup in case there's a month when my actual usage is greater than the kilowatt hours that can be provided by the solar co-op. However, my question is about the billing. I'm glad somebody brought up the billing because Pepco apparently is not crediting Clean Choice Energy. And I'm getting billed for Clean Choice Energy and the balance just keeps getting higher and higher and higher on my Pepco bill. I called Clean Choice and they said, don't worry, you don't owe us anything. And so there's no way, since I only pay Pepco,
Right.
there's no way I can zero out that balance from Clean Choice. And I just didn't know if anybody else had that issue.
I have not heard of that, but it's certainly, and if I'm understanding it correctly, is it the community solar credits that are not getting applied properly from your understanding? Or is it
the Clean Choice, the community solar credits credit my bill, my Pepco bill. So my Pepco bill is only like $37 a month, but it looks like the Clean Choice charges for that month are like $80 a month, and none of it gets, only $37 will get applied. So I'm building up an unpaid balance with Clean Choice that Clean Choice says I don't have.
Interesting. Okay.
Nobody at Pepco has been able to straighten out the billing, but I can always call back again.
Yeah, I wish I had a better suggestion for you there. I'm actually not familiar with that particular challenge. Although I will say for billing purposes, just broadly, what I would recommend doing is if you don't get satisfaction from Pepco, is contact OPC, the Office of People's Counsel, and explain to them what's happening, and they should be able to apply whatever pressure to help you sort it out. They're very, very helpful in that regard.
OPC?
Office of People's Counsel, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. It looks like that's all the raised hands. Any other questions folks have, feel free to ask it. Otherwise, we will call it a night here. Give it just another minute. Oh, Ron, there we go. Ron, you're unmuted. Go ahead. Ron, are you there? Oh, he's lowered his hand. Okay. All right, well, I think that's all the questions we see for this evening. Thank you again, everyone, for joining. We really appreciate it, and have a lovely evening. Thanks for sharing an hour of your time with us tonight, and we hope to see you for episode 2 or episode 3 or both. Thanks again, and have a good night. Oops, is that Ron? Is that you?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm sorry, I was muted.
Okay, go ahead.
Can a consumer subscribe to more than one community solar provider if their needs are greater than what can be provided through one?
Are you in Maryland?
Yes, I am.
I believe the regulations do allow you to do that.
Okay.
As far as I know, yeah. It's unusual because most providers should be able to give you what you need, but I don't think there's anything that's preventing that.
Well, I'm actually asking on behalf of my church, which has a pretty large energy consumption bill. So yeah.
Okay. Super. Yeah, I think you should be fine. If you run into problems, please do let us know. We are always keen to sort of keep a track of that stuff.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you. Let's see here. I thought I saw another hand. Oh yes, Christine Reed, go right ahead.
Yes, would it be possible for you to give just a really short synopsis on what the net metering issue is and how concerned we should actually be about it?
I will do my best. That's not something that I've been following as closely as some of my colleagues, but the general idea is that there is a organization in New England that many folks believe is sort of a front group or some utility interests, that they have filed a petition with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to essentially call into question how the credits are valued because they are considered electricity sales that should be regulated by the federal government as opposed to the state governments. What we've seen, thankfully, is that a lot of states have actually, attorneys generals and other entities in states have filed petitions against this motion because of its impact for states' rights and their ability to determine their own electricity policies within their borders. So we're hopeful that FERC will just ignore it. But if they did take the case up, it potentially would cause a lot of sort of, to review it, it would take a long time first. So it's not something that's going to happen quickly. If they did take it up, which we hope is unlikely, they would have to spend a lot of time working through that case. And if for some reason they ruled in favor of the petition, states would then would likely need to revisit their net metering policies to make sure they were compatible and in line with that. That's a long way down the road.
Yeah,
and that's why we're sort of, we're pushing it back against it, and a lot of others did very strongly. But it's not something that's going to happen overnight, and we hope it doesn't happen at all.
That's good. Well, here in Washington, we've just had a bill go through that actually was very explicit about the social justice issue. And so I think that there would probably be a lot of pushback on that, even with the government agency, even with FERC.
Yeah, based on the level of opposition we saw from state entities, I would imagine it would be in court for years before anything happened.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, everybody. Have a lovely evening, and we will see you next time.